The sun dipped behind the towering oak trees as Karen stormed out of her McMansion, her face twisted in a mask of rage. I gripped the metal gate, my knuckles turning white, as she charged towards me, screaming curses that echoed across the placid lake. This was my land, my kingdom, and I refused to let her bully me out of it. It all started on a seemingly ordinary Tuesday when I decided to spruce up the lakefront property I had purchased a year ago. I loved this little slice of heaven, tucked away in the manicured suburbs. The sparkling water, the lush greenery, the tranquil solitude. It was my own private oasis, a refuge from the chaos of the outside world. As I tended to the garden, pruning the hedges and clearing the fallen leaves, I noticed a car slowly cruising down the private road. I squinted, shielding my eyes from the glare of the afternoon sun, and to my dismay, I recognized the driver. It was Karen, the self-appointed queen of our homeowners association. Karen lived a few doors down, in a mansion that looked like it belonged on the cover of a design magazine. She was the type of person who always had to have the last word, who delighted in making other people's lives miserable. I had crossed paths with her before, and it never ended well. Sure enough, the car came to a screeching halt, and Karen emerged, her face contorted in a sneer. "You there," she bellowed, storming towards me. "What do you think you're doing?" I straightened my back, trying to appear calm and collected. "I'm just tending to my property, Karen," I replied, keeping my tone level. "Your property," she scoffed, her eyes narrowing. "This lake is a community asset, and you have no right to restrict access to it." I felt a familiar surge of frustration. "This lakefront is part of my private land, Karen. I have every right to control who comes and goes." Her nostrils flared, and I could see the vein in her forehead throbbing. "That's ridiculous. You can't just lock people out of the lake. It's for everyone to enjoy." "It's my property, Karen," I reiterated, my voice firm. "I'm not stopping anyone from using the rest of the community lake, but this specific stretch belongs to me, and I'll do with it as I please." "We'll see about that," she spat, turning on her heel and stomping back to her car. I watched her peel out of the driveway, kicking up a cloud of dust in her wake. I knew this wasn't the end of it. Karen was the type of person who never backed down, even when she was clearly in the wrong. I braced myself for the inevitable confrontation, wondering what her next move would be. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the glistening water, I heard the familiar sound of sirens in the distance. My heart sank. Surely, Karen had called the police, intent on causing me more trouble. I steeled myself, ready to defend my rights and my property, no matter the cost. The police cars pulled up, and 2 officers emerged, their faces stern. I took a deep breath, preparing to explain the situation, when the lead officer approached me with a grave expression. "Sir, we've received a report of a disturbance here. Can you tell us what's going on?" I took a deep breath, carefully explaining the situation to the officers. "I own this lakefront property, and I've decided to restrict access to this specific stretch of the lake." But Karen, from the homeowners association, showed up and started yelling at me, claiming I can't do that. The officers listened intently, their brows furrowed. "I see," the lead officer said, stroking his chin thoughtfully. "And what prompted you to restrict access to this part of the lake?" "Well, to be honest, I just wanted a little privacy and tranquility," I admitted. "This lake is a community asset, but this particular section is on my land. I'm not stopping anyone from using the rest of the lake, but I feel I should have some control over my own property." The officers exchanged a glance, and I could see the wheels turning in their minds. "We understand your perspective," the officer replied. "However, we've also received a complaint from the homeowners association, and they claim you're denying public access to the lake." I felt a surge of frustration. "But this isn't public land. It's mine, and I have every right to control who comes and goes." The officers held up their hands in a placating gesture. "We understand your frustration, sir, but we're going to need to investigate this further. In the meantime, We'd advise you to keep the gate open and allow unrestricted access to the lake." "But that's not fair," I protested, my voice rising. "I bought this property fair and square, and I should have the right to do what I want with it." The lead officer fixed me with a stern gaze. "I understand your position, but we need to uphold the law and ensure that the community's interests are being respected. For now, we're going to have to ask you to leave the gate open." I could feel the anger bubbling up inside me, but I knew arguing with the police would only make the situation worse. Reluctantly, I nodded, watching as the officers returned to their cars and drove away. As the sirens faded into the distance, I stood there, my fists clenched in frustration. How dare Karen manipulate the system and try to take away my property rights? I knew I couldn't just roll over and let her win. I had to find a way to fight back. Determined, I stormed back into the house, my mind racing. I had to find a way to prove that this was my land, and that I had the right to control access to it. But with Karen's deep pockets and connections, I knew it wouldn't be an easy battle. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the lake in a warm golden glow, I knew one thing for certain. I was going to have to get creative if I wanted to win this war. The next morning, I woke up with a renewed sense of determination. I wasn't going to let Karen and the Homeowners Association bully me out of my own property. I quickly got dressed and headed out to the lakefront, ready to take action. As I approached the gate, I noticed a group of people gathered around it, Karen at the center of the commotion. She spotted me, and her face instantly contorted with rage. "There he is," she shouted, pointing an accusatory finger in my direction. "This is the man who's trying to deny us access to the community lake." I took a deep breath, trying to remain calm in the face of her outburst. "I've told you before, Karen. This stretch of the lake is on my private property. I have every right to control who comes and goes." "That's ridiculous," she spat. "This lake is a shared resource, and you can't just fence it off like it's your own personal playground." I opened my mouth to respond, but one of the other residents beat me to it. "She's right. You know," a middle-aged man chimed in, his brow furrowed. "We all pay our HOA fees, and we should have equal access to the lake." I felt my heart sink as more people voiced their agreement. It was clear that Karen had rallied the community against me, and I knew I was fighting an uphill battle. "Look, I understand your concerns," I said, trying to reason with the crowd. "But this is my private property, and I have the right to control who uses it. I'm not stopping anyone from using the rest of the lake, just this specific stretch." "That's not good enough," Karen shouted, her eyes blazing with fury. "Either you open up the gate, or we'll take this to the courts." I clenched my jaw, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on me. I knew that going to court would be a costly and time-consuming battle, and I couldn't be sure of the outcome. But I also couldn't back down. This was my land, and I was determined to defend it. "I'm sorry, but my decision stands," I said, my voice firm. "I'm not going to open up the gate, and you're welcome to take this to court if you want." Karen let out an exasperated huff, her face turning a deep shade of red. "Mark my words, you'll regret this," she spat, before storming off, the crowd of residents trailing behind her. I watched them go, a mixture of dread and determination churning in my stomach. I knew that this was just the beginning of a long and bitter battle, but I was more determined than ever to stand my ground. As the sun rose higher in the sky, casting a warm glow over the rippling water, I steeled myself for the challenges that lay ahead. I was ready to fight, no matter what it took. In the days that followed, the tension between me and the Homeowners Association only escalated. Karen had wasted no time in taking legal action, and soon, I found myself embroiled in a drawn-out battle over the ownership of the lakefront property. I spent countless hours poring over documents, consulting with lawyers, and preparing my defense. The Homeowners Association had deep pockets and a team of experienced attorneys, and they were determined to take me down. Every time I stepped outside, I could feel the eyes of my neighbors watching me, their expressions a mix of curiosity and judgment. Karen had clearly turned the community against me, painting me as the villain who was trying to deny them access to a shared resource. But I refused to back down. This was my land, and I was determined to fight for my rights. I spent hours researching local laws and regulations, looking for any loopholes or technicalities that could work in my favor. And then, one day, I stumbled upon a game-changing discovery. As I pored over the deeds and property records, I noticed a small clause that seemed to have been overlooked by the Homeowners Association's lawyers. According to the documents, the lakefront property I had purchased was designated as a private recreational area, with specific provisions for controlling access and usage. In other words, I had the legal right to restrict access to the lake, as long as I maintained certain requirements. Excitement and relief flooded through me as I realized I had finally found the key to winning this battle. I immediately set to work, documenting every detail and preparing a comprehensive legal strategy. When the court date arrived, I walked into the courtroom with a renewed sense of confidence. The Homeowners Association's lawyers were confident that they would easily win the case, but as I presented my evidence, their expressions slowly shifted from smugness to confusion, and then to outright dismay. The judge listened intently, his brow furrowing as he carefully reviewed the documents. Finally, he turned to the Homeowners Association's lawyers and delivered his verdict. Based on the evidence presented, the court has determined that the lakefront property in question is indeed the private property of the defendant, and that he has the legal right to restrict access to this specific stretch of the lake. A stunned silence fell over the courtroom as the Homeowners Association's lawyers struggled to comprehend the ruling. I couldn't help but feel a twinge of satisfaction as I watched Karen's face contort with rage and frustration. As I stepped out of the courthouse, I knew that this was just the beginning of a long and arduous battle. Karen was not the type of person to simply accept defeat, and I knew that she would be back, ready to fight even harder. But for now, I savored the sweet taste of victory. I had stood up to the Homeowners Association and won, and I was more determined than ever to defend my property rights, no matter what it took. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the tranquil lake, I stood at the gate, my gaze fixed on the horizon. I knew that the victory I had won in court was only a temporary respite. Karen and the Homeowners Association would not give up so easily. Sure enough, just as the last rays of daylight began to fade, I saw a familiar car pull up to the gate. Karen emerged, her face twisted with rage, and I braced myself for the inevitable confrontation. "You think you've won, don't you?" she spat, storming towards me. But this isn't over, not by a long shot. I held my ground, my expression calm and collected. "I've already proven that I have the legal right to control access to this part of the lake, Karen. The court has spoken." She let out a harsh, mirthless laugh. "The court? Please, don't make me laugh. This is far from over. We have powerful friends, and we're not going to let you get away with this." I felt a chill run down my spine at her words, but I refused to let her see my unease. "I've followed the rules, Karen. If you have a problem with that, then take it up with the courts." "Oh, we will," she growled, her eyes narrowing to slits. "But in the meantime, we have other ways of making your life a living hell." Before I could respond, she whirled around and stalked back to her car, peeling out of the driveway with a squeal of tires. I watched her go, a sense of dread settling in the pit of my stomach. I knew that Karen was a force to be reckoned with, and I had no doubt that she would stop at nothing to get her way. The thought of what she might have in store for me sent a shiver down my spine, but I refused to let her intimidate me. As the darkness crept in, I made my way back to the house, my mind racing with possibilities. I had to be prepared for whatever Karen and the Homeowners Association had planned, and I knew that it wouldn't be easy. But I also knew that I couldn't back down. This was my land, my sanctuary, and I was determined to protect it at all costs. I might have won the initial battle, but the war was far from over. With a deep breath, I set to work, reviewing the court documents and formulating a plan of action. I would need to be vigilant, to stay one step ahead of Karen and her cronies, and if they tried to come after me, I would be ready. The night wore on, and as the stars twinkled in the inky sky, I knew that the true test of my resolve was just beginning. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity as I braced myself for Karen's retaliation. I knew she wouldn't let her defeat in court go unchallenged, and I was determined to be prepared for whatever she had in store. I spent countless hours reviewing the property records, consulting with my lawyers, and fortifying the gate that stood as the barrier between my private lakefront and the rest of the community. I installed security cameras, trimmed the hedges to improve visibility, and even considered hiring a private security guard to patrol the area. But as the days passed, an eerie silence settled over the neighborhood. Karen and the homeowners association seemed to have gone underground, and I couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. What were they planning, and when would the other shoe drop? Then, one morning, I received a letter in the mail that sent a chill down my spine. It was from the homeowners association, informing me that they had initiated a special assessment to fund a community beautification project that would involve the removal of several trees and landscaping features along the lakefront. My heart raced as I read the details, realizing that the so-called beautification was nothing more than a thinly veiled attempt to undermine my control over the property. They were trying to use their influence and resources to force me into submission. Without hesitation, I fired off a strongly worded response, reminding them of the court's ruling and warning them against any unauthorized changes to the lakefront. I knew that this was just the beginning of a new battle, and I was determined to stand my ground. In the days that followed, the tension in the neighborhood reached a fever pitch. Neighbors who had once been friendly now avoided my gaze, and I could feel the weight of their disapproval bearing down on me. Karen had clearly rallied the community against me, painting me as the villain who was selfishly hoarding the lake for his own personal use. But I refused to back down. I continued to maintain a vigilant watch over the lakefront, ready to confront any trespassers or attempt to alter the property. I knew that Karen would stop at nothing to get her way, and I had to be prepared for anything. As the weeks turned into months, the battle raged on, with both sides refusing to give an inch. I poured my heart and soul into defending my property, pouring countless hours and thousands of dollars into legal fees and security measures. And then, one day, as I was tending to the garden, I heard a familiar sound, the rumble of a car engine. I looked up to see Karen's sleek sedan pulling up to the gate, a triumphant grin plastered across her face. My heart sank as I realized that this was the moment I had been dreading. Whatever she had planned, it was about to unfold, and I steeled myself for the confrontation that was to come. As Karen stepped out of her car, her eyes gleaming with a malicious triumph, I felt my stomach twist with dread. I knew that she had something up her sleeve, and I braced myself for whatever was about to happen. Well, she purred, sauntering towards me with a smug expression. Looks like your little fortress is about to come crashing down. I narrowed my eyes, my grip tightening on the metal gate that separated us. What are you talking about, Karen? She let out a harsh, grating laugh. Oh, you'll see. Just wait and watch. With that, she turned and gestured towards a group of men who had emerged from the shadows, carrying what looked like heavy machinery. My heart raced as I realized they were preparing to tear down the gate, the very barrier that had stood as my last line of defense. You can't do this, I shouted, panic rising in my voice. I have a court order that gives me the right to control access to this property. Karen shrugged, a smug smile playing on her lips. That may be true, but the Homeowners Association has decided that the gate is a safety hazard. And you know what that means. I felt a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach as realization dawned on me. You're using the HOA's authority to bypass the court order. Exactly, she purred, her eyes glinting with triumph. And there's nothing you can do about it. I watched in horror as the men began to dismantle the gate, their tools cutting through the metal like a hot knife through butter. My mind raced desperately searching for a way to stop them. But I knew that the law was no longer on my side. As the gate crumbled to the ground, I felt a sense of defeat wash over me. All the time, effort, and money I had poured into defending my property had been for naught. Karen had found a way to outmaneuver me, using the very system that was supposed to protect me against me. I stood there, powerless, as the men continued their work, clearing away the debris and leaving a gaping opening in the once secure barrier. Karen stood by, her arms crossed over her chest, a smug grin plastered across her face. "There, that's much better," she said, surveying her handiwork with satisfaction. "Now the whole community can enjoy the lake, just like it should be." I opened my mouth to protest, but the words caught in my throat. I knew that any further resistance would be futile. Karen had won, and there was nothing I could do about it. As the sun began to set, casting an eerie glow over the now open lakefront, I felt a deep sense of betrayal and despair wash over me. I had fought so hard, only to have it all stripped away in the end. But as the darkness settled in, a glimmer of determination began to flicker within me. I wasn't going to let Karen have the last laugh. Somehow, someway, I was going to find a way to reclaim what was rightfully mine. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the now open lakefront, I stood there, feeling a mixture of defeat and determination. Karen had won this round, using the Homeowners Association's authority to bypass the court order and remove the gate that had guarded my private property. But I refused to give up. This was my land, my sanctuary, and I wasn't about to let Karen and her cronies take it away from me without a fight. As the first wave of community members began to trickle in, eager to reclaim their access to the lake, I felt a spark of inspiration. I watched as they strolled along the shoreline, their laughter and chatter filling the air. And then, an idea began to take shape in my mind. I quickly made my way back to the house, my mind racing with possibilities. I knew that I couldn't simply rebuild the gate and try to enforce my rights. That would only lead to more confrontation and conflict. But maybe, just maybe, I could find a way to turn the tables on Karen and the Homeowners Association. Grabbing a pair of rubber gloves and a shovel, I headed back to the lakefront, a determined glint in my eye. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I set to work, carefully digging a series of shallow trenches along the shoreline, strategically placing them to create a natural barrier. The work was backbreaking, and I could feel the sweat beading on my brow, but I refused to stop. I knew that time was of the essence, and I had to move quickly before anyone caught on to what I was doing. As the last of the community members began to filter out, I stepped back, surveying my handiwork with a sense of satisfaction. The trenches were shallow, but they were deep enough to pose a significant obstacle to anyone trying to access the lake. And better yet, they were completely legal. I hadn't violated any rules or regulations. I stood there, my heart pounding, as the first few curious onlookers began to approach the newly transformed lakefront. I watched with bated breath as they cautiously made their way towards the water, only to be met with the unexpected barrier. The reactions were priceless. Some stumbled and cursed, while others simply turned back, shaking their heads in confusion. And then, just as I had predicted, the calls started coming into the Homeowners Association. I couldn't help but smile as I imagined the look of pure fury on Karen's face as she received the news. She had thought she had outmaneuvered me, but little did she know that I had a few tricks of my own up my sleeve. As the darkness settled in, I made my way back to the house, my steps lighter than they had been in weeks. I knew that the battle wasn't over, but for now, I had managed to regain a small piece of my property, and that was a victory worth savoring. Tomorrow, I would have to face the consequences of my actions, but tonight, I allowed myself to revel in the sweet taste of revenge. Karen had pushed me too far, and now it was time for her to face the consequences of her own hubris.